What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, we're going over 4 wide receivers that are going a bit too early in drafts. Now, keep in mind, this does not mean we're necessarily avoiding these players. In fact, I'm fine with drafting every player in this video, so long as they fall a bit down the draft board. We'll get into exactly those players and the reasons why, but before we do, quick shout out, if you guys do enjoy these videos, show your support by hitting that like button. It only takes a moment for you, but greatly helps us out in growing the channel. As you guys may know, we're on the road to 100k subscribers. Our goal is to hit that by the start of the NFL season, and with your help, we can definitely make that happen. Also, guys, our draft packages are currently available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So if you want access to the tier-based rankings, our sleepers, our targets, our busts, player projections, video player breakdowns on the top 150 players, not only that, you get our risk ratings, access to our private community, and more. So if that's something that interests you, once again, that's at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that said, though, it's time to hop over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was 7 players last season posted 3 rushing touchdowns in a single game. Only one of those players was a quarterback, though. Which player was that? The correct answer was actually Dak Prescott. Congratulations to Charles Johnston, the first to get this right on YouTube, and as for Twitter, @_Hoddard. Once again, congratulations to both of you. But as for today's stat of the day, last season there were 7 instances of a running back receiving 32 plus touches in a single game. One running back in the league, though, owns 4 of those 7 spots. If you know who that player is, leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Without further ado, though, it's time to get into wide receivers that are simply being drafted too early. As per usual, though, we'll begin with the player on the thumbnail. No surprise here, it's Adam Thielen of the Minnesota Vikings. If you've been following our content for the entire offseason, then you'll know I'm pretty low on Adam Thielen. Now, I get that may not sound like a super bold take to most of you out there, but you guys have to think this was a player who just last season finished as the wide receiver 10. On top of that, he returns with the same quarterback, same wide receiver group. I mean, somebody could make the argument that if Adam Thielen finished as the wide receiver 10 last season, then with him being drafted just outside the top 20 this season, then he could be coming in at a massive value. I get the logic, and every Adam Thielen truther so far this offseason has brought that up. It's one of the main reasons I'm not completely avoiding Adam Thielen. Just to reiterate, this is a players being drafted too early video, not a wide receivers to avoid video. As an Adam Thielen owner in 2019, you have to understand how unpredictable his production was. In 2020, he had 108 targets, converting that into 74 receptions, 925 receiving yards to go along with a whopping 14 touchdowns. Now, obviously, 14 touchdowns is massive, not just for Adam Thielen, but for any wide receiver. Many wide receivers go their entire career without ever hitting that mark. And Adam Thielen himself had a previous career high of 9 receiving touchdowns, never quite hitting double digits. It's clear as day that this should be looked at as an outlier. I can feel confident in saying that because Adam Thielen, up to this point in his career, has never been a superior red zone threat. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Adam Thielen won't be a heavy target for the Minnesota Vikings in the red zone this year. In fact, I do believe he will be, but what I'm more alarmed about is the fact that he finished as the wide receiver 10 despite only receiving 108 targets. Adam Thielen actually ranked 27th in targets last season, 21st in air yards, 26th in average target distance, but despite that finished as a top 10 fantasy receiver on the back of 14 receiving touchdowns. The most alarming part, though, definitely has to be the lack of air yards, the shallow average target distance. Those factors indicate that he would need more targets in order to produce like some of the other receivers in the league. 108 targets for Thielen is not the same as 108 targets for Jefferson. A player like Tyreek Hill can live off 108 targets, but a player like Adam Thielen will have a tough time cracking 1K yards with that type of target market share. Not to mention, he has an uphill battle to begin with. This team last season ranked 25th in total passing volume. Not to mention, Justin Jefferson had a dominant rookie season, so you also have to expect that his involvement is going to increase rather than decrease. With Kirk Cousins feeling more comfortable developing chemistry with Justin Jefferson, some of the targets that went to Adam Thielen last year, Kirk Cousins will now know from experience that he can rely on Jefferson in those situations. This is an advantage Jefferson did not have last season. That's something I think we all can agree on. So when it comes to Adam Thielen and valuing him for 2021 fantasy drafts, the question we have to ask ourselves is if he sees a drop-off in touchdowns from 14 to possibly 8 or 9. With the same type of target market share, same yardage, are we going to feel comfortable drafting him where he's currently falling in drafts? The short answer, in my opinion, is he's being overvalued this season. One thing we have to factor in is if his touchdown numbers are going to decrease and his targets are going to remain the same, his week-to-week volatility is going to be massive. As an Adam Thielen owner in 2020, I can tell you from experience, owning Adam Thielen last season, even though he finished as a top 10 wide receiver, was not fun at all. Watching games with Adam Thielen, hoping he gets a touchdown on a low-volume passing offense with Justin Jefferson completely balling out. Even though Thielen scored 14 times, owning him did not feel as safe as it seemed. It certainly didn't feel like you had a top 10 wide receiver, and heading into 2021, those highs and lows are going to be amplified. When you compare Thielen to the other receivers around him, I just prefer to take other options with higher upside, players that are trending upward. Adam Thielen, unfortunately, in this Minnesota Vikings offense with Justin Jefferson, his best days are likely behind him. Alright guys, we're moving into the next player. It's Carolina Panthers wide receiver DJ Moore. I do want to preface this and just say I have been a massive DJ Moore supporter ever since he was drafted. I'll be the first to admit, I was even high on him heading into last season, which really made it pretty disappointing and head-scratching as to why he had such a disappointing season. I don't think we can necessarily call it a bust. Of course, finished as the wide receiver 23 in a PPR league on the back of 118 targets, 66 receptions, 1,190 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now, I don't think you can really call a receiver that finishes within the top 24, a mere 7 yards away from 1,200 receiving yards. I don't think we can really call him a bust, but it's safe to say he disappointed a lot of people that drafted him. And heading into 2021, the question we have to ask ourselves is it going to get better? The case for him, Curtis Samuel is no longer on the team. While Curtis Samuel didn't garner a high amount of targets, he was heavily involved in the offense. On average, over the past 2 seasons, he received 100 targets, so that frees up 100 targets to be distributed amongst all of the receivers in this offense. On top of that, Christian McCaffrey is presumably returning healthy, and with a healthy Christian McCaffrey, you have to assume that this offense will improve. An improved offense means increased scoring opportunities, so hopefully his 4 touchdowns from last season we see increase. His only other competition for targets in the red zone comes from Robbie Anderson, and we know one thing about Robbie Anderson is he's not a very physical receiver. He's a deep threat, he's a speedster, but in the red zone he's not really too much of a threat. If comparing the two, I easily give the edge to DJ Moore in this area, so if I'm going to take bets on DJ Moore possibly meeting or exceeding his touchdown totals from last season, I think he has a really solid shot. That's the good though. As for the bad, Teddy Bridgewater was actually surprisingly good. In 2020, he finished 12th in yards per attempt, but on top of that was the most accurate quarterback, ranking 1st in that area. So even though Bridgewater was accurate, it wasn't because he was shying away from the deep ball. In fact, he was actually ranked 13th in deep ball accuracy as well. On top of that, he finished 7th in catchable pass percentage, 7th in clean pocket completion percentage. These are the stats we would expect from a well above average quarterback, and unfortunately, Bridgewater is no longer the QB in Carolina. The new QB in Carolina is Sam Darnold, formerly of the New York Jets. Looking at his past career though, there really isn't much to get excited about. While I'm not going to completely write him off, and I will give him an opportunity to prove himself in this new offense with a new coaching staff, at the same time, there's no way I can expect Sam Darnold to produce as well as Teddy Bridgewater did, because Bridgewater, simply put, exceeded expectations. On top of that, one thing I don't hear brought up enough is how Robbie Anderson and Sam Darnold, formerly teammates in New York, they are going to have a chemistry that they built up in seasons past, and while I don't think that's a death sentence for DJ Moore, and I still value him as the highest ranked receiver in Carolina, it is undoubtedly a disadvantage at the early portion of the season. With Sam Darnold being inexperienced in this offense and unproven, I could easily see him have a tendency when things get tough to rely on the receiver he feels most comfortable with. Easily that's going to be Robbie Anderson, at least at the early portion of this season, so I do think DJ Moore has an uphill battle to reach his ceiling, and I don't think that's fairly accounted in his ADP. Currently, DJ Moore is coming off the board as the wide receiver 19, 4 spots higher than where he finished last season. Clearly the public is expecting improvement, but I think he might have a difficult time in the early portion of the season, and I think people will realize how much they took Bridgewater for granted. Alright guys, we're moving into the third player there, it's Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins. This is a prime example of how I love the player. He's actually listed as a target, but we have him ranked several spots lower than his current ADP, which is all the way up at the wide receiver 24. Now, initially at first sight, it does seem like a good value to draft T. Higgins at the wide receiver 24, albeit that's where he finished last season, but there are a few factors we have to take into consideration before feeling comfortable pulling the trigger at that draft spot. Like I mentioned though, he's still a player we're targeting. We still do have him ranked inside the top 30, but if you ask me, the wide receiver 24 is just a bit too pricey for my liking. For starters, this is a team that had a massive amount of passing volume. Cincinnati finished 13th in that area last season, but before Joe Burrow went down with an injury, this team was on pace to compete with league lead in that area. Now, obviously, that wasn't by design. It was more a matter of circumstance. If it were up to them and they could rely on a strong defense, a solid run game, I'm sure that would have been the option they would have preferred, especially considering the end result was Joe Burrow going down with a season-ending injury. Heading into this season, knowing that they have an injured Joe Burrow, they're going to have to do a better job at taking care of him. And how do they do that? An increased focus in the run game, getting the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. Clearly, that's not going to benefit the wide receiver that ranked 10th in 2020 Indeed targets as just a rookie. On top of that, we know at the beginning portion of the season, T. Higgins wasn't heavily involved because they were trying to get AJ Green to work. That failed experiment is no longer going to be an issue, but that's not to say T. Higgins has the same opportunity that he did in 2020. In fact, quite the opposite. The Cincinnati Bengals drafted Jamar Chase with the 5th overall pick in this year's draft. Now, previously, T. Higgins was competing with Tyler Boyd, but Boyd can coexist with all of these other receivers. They weren't really eating into each other's production, not like AJ Green and T. Higgins were, but instead of him competing with AJ Green, an old busted up wide receiver, a shell of his former self, now he has to compete for targets with Jamar Chase, the best receiving prospect we've seen in several years. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow actually went to the same college, played together for an entire season and a half, so technically, rookie Jamar Chase, who's never played a down in the NFL, has more experience with the quarterback Joe Burrow than T. Higgins, who played an entire year in this offense. With all of that being said, though, I'm not completely off T. Higgins. Like I said, we still have him ranked inside the top 30, but expecting him to put up the same numbers as he did last season, with all of these obstacles in his way, it's just an unrealistic expectation. If his price drops a little bit, I think the package you get with him is more than fair for the price, but with his current ADP being the wide receiver 24, I just think there's a much stronger chance that he disappoints at that price tag rather than exceeds our expectations. Alright guys, we're into the final wide receiver, and I think this is one we all can agree upon. It's Will Fuller of the Miami Dolphins. Now, Will Fuller is coming off of a really successful season, in fact, his most successful season of his career. That's really saying something because he only finished as the wide receiver 32 on the back of 75 targets, 58 receptions, 879 receiving yards to go along with 8 receiving touchdowns. You heard it right, Will Fuller's best season comes on the back of under 900 receiving yards. He did beat out his reception totals this season in a prior season, but unfortunately that was all the way back in his rookie year, so we're talking 5 years removed. But 75 receptions was the second most of his entire career. Pretty impressive considering he only played in 11 games. Now 11 games is not uncommon for a Will Fuller season, but this time he switched it up a bit. Instead of getting injured, he actually was suspended for PEDs. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not avoiding Will Fuller because of his injuries or his PED concerns. If we're talking a player that's being drafted outside the top 40, I'm fine with taking a hit in safety in order to bring in the upside. The only difficulty with that is that Will Fuller in this season, it's really difficult to make a case for him having the same amount of upside. Last year with Deshaun Watson, an elite quarterback, Will Fuller was playing his best football. We have to keep in mind though, that was on a team that he was drafted by, a team in an offense he felt comfortable in. Now he's a free agent, switching teams, and this is a super crowded wide receiver room. For starters, you have Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, not to mention rookie Jalen Waddle, which has a ton of upside, I think is a more solid late round pick. And we also can't forget about Mike Gesicki. So we're talking Will Fuller goes from an offense with an elite quarterback where he's the focal point wide receiver 1, now transitions to the Miami Dolphins. And from what we saw from Tua in his rookie season, it's really difficult to make a case for several receivers on this team to be fantasy relevant. Currently, Will Fuller has the highest ADP out of all of them. I'd prefer to take an option much later, which has an equal amount amount of upside and less risk, either Devontae Parker or Jalen Waddle, I err on the side of Jalen Waddle because despite Will Fuller putting in his most productive fantasy season last year, heading into 2021, that's all irrelevant. The situation's completely changed. The quarterback is not going to have as much upside, nor is the offense going to need to throw as much as Houston did. And on top of that, Will Fuller's not even the wide receiver one in this offense. If he does carve out a role, it's unclear how long he'll stay healthy. He certainly doesn't have a strong track record. And for those reasons, I think the wide receiver 40 price tag is just a bit too much to ask. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.